Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation's LNTV. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Today we're joined by Liberty Nation's Legal Affairs Editor, Mr. Scott DeCosenza. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, Mark.
Well, Scott, so people are clamoring for President Trump to either keep the country closed or to open it up, depending on their perspective. Meanwhile, there's travel restrictions that are piling up, and some states like Delaware are using the police to actually seize travelers with out-of-state plates. Now, to make sense of this all, Scott, first, can police actually do this with out-of-state plates like that?
Well, it seems they can, Mark. The question is yet to be answered on point, which is to say we don't have an identical set of circumstances that the courts have tested to indicate whether or not we can rely on it to give a good answer for this question. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, there were a number of cases involving travel with diseased-type persons or public health restrictions on travel. That's sort of the analogous cases that we're drawing from to answer the question for today. And it seems like they can. It seems like that in order to combat a public health crisis, they can pull over people with out-of-state plates. Now, what they do when they pull them over is a different question. To advise them to self-quarantine, for instance, is what we're being told they are doing now. That seems perfectly legal. But we don't yet know until we have a case on point, which I suspect we will if they are making many of these seizures, because what inevitably will happen is they'll pull somebody over, Mark, who is otherwise breaking the law. Which, sure. By that I mean they'll pull somebody over and there will be drugs or some other contraband in the car, and the initial stop was initiated because of an out-of-state plate. That person will then challenge the introduction of the evidence based on that stop, and then we'll have rulings from the court to determine.
So, I mean, to try and make this particular tactic that's being used effective, what about simply banning people or cars from other areas? What's going on with that?
Well, we couldn't do that. That is definitely not allowable under our right to travel guaranteed under the Constitution. Now, you could ask, well, why then would it be okay to pull somebody over based on their plates? The Constitution forbids unreasonable search and seizure. So the question then becomes, what is reasonable? And if there are high incidents of people who have the COVID-19 virus, for instance, from New York, and you're Delaware, it may be reasonable to pull people over with New York plates to ask, have they been in New York recently? Can they self-quarantine? Those sorts of things may be reasonable. Whereas it would not be reasonable to simply say, there could be people who have lived in Delaware for a year and just haven't changed their plates, for instance, from New York. So it wouldn't be reasonable for those people to be kept out of the state, for instance.
Okay, and how about the president? What can he do to stop this travel or to even open it up?
Well, I think there's probably a misunderstanding about him opening or closing things. And he advises and can use the bully pulpit, and his state of emergency orders can advise other governments, namely state governments, whether they want to lift restrictions. But there is no federal national restriction on travel or getting around that is enforceable by the president. These things are basically done through the state level authorities.
Scott DeCosenza, thank you very much. Remember, you can check us out on libertynation.com or go to our Roku channel. Thanks for being here.